CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's a coding language that works really closely with HTML. In fact, if you haven't seen the first video we did on HTML to build this website over here on the side, then I would recommend going back to watch that first. HTML and CSS are like peanut butter and jelly. They work really closely together and you really got to have them both to make an awesome website. If you use just HTML, it'll just be plain, just like default styles like you can see here on the right hand side. And if you just use CSS, there'd be very little or in most cases nothing for you to actually style and no content for your website. Now in the HTML code, let me start right here on line 5. If you look inside of the head element here, you can notice that there is a link. Now this link is pointing to a style sheet. We know that CSS now stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So if we look over here, we can see that it actually points to a file called style.css. Now on BSD Online, the style.css file is located right here in the blue tab. When we open this up by default, there's no styles, and that's what we expect because we haven't written any CSS yet. So let's get started. Now, if I'm going to actually use CSS to make changes to how my website looks, well, then the CSS is going to need to know which element to change, meaning am I resizing the image, am I coloring the heading, am I changing the font of the paragraphs? We're going to try all those things in this video. The first thing we're going to start off with is that image. Now in this case, my image looks pretty good at this size, but you can imagine on a much bigger or smaller screen, I may have to size my image appropriately. So what I'll do is I'm going to break down the parts of CSS using the image as an example. If I click right here on line 1, the first thing I'm going to write is the letters IMG. Now this is the first part of creating a CSS rule. What I've done is I've added a selector. A selector tells the CSS which element it should change in the HTML. So in this case, the IMG, or the image, means that the CSS is going to be focusing its attention first on this image right here. Now you can see that the autocomplete is suggesting that I now add these two curly brackets, and if I were to go ahead and click on this, you'll see that it kind of formats them in an interesting way, where it uses 3 lines. Now this is why CSS is such a nice coding language to move on to from HTML, because it starts to introduce the formats that you see in lots of other popular coding languages, such as C++ or Java. Now, what do these curly brackets mean? Well, the curly brackets that start and end a CSS rule are set there so that you can put in all the different things you'd like your image to do inside of them. We call those properties. So I could do things like round the corners or add borders. I could add spacing around it and work on the layout. I could even put filters over it, like popular apps like Instagram. In this case, I'm going to use CSS to perform a very simple resize function. And let's try that together. So I'm going to type the word width, W-I-D-T-H, and width, of course, referring to the width of this image. I'm going to add the colon after that. That's the 2 dots on your keyboard right next to the letter L. Then I'm going to put in a pixel value. I'm choosing pixels because we're working with a computer screen and pixels to me make sense as a unit of measure, although there's a lot of other different things that you could use, such as inches or centimeters or percents, and there's other ones that web developers really like to use like ems. Now, every line of CSS should be ended with a semicolon. This is another thing that you're going to start seeing as you learn more and more coding languages. Oftentimes the semicolon is essentially the end of a line. Now, if we were to actually run our code, we're going to see the result of this, which ends up being a very small image. Apparently 50 pixels is not what it used to be. It's a very, very small size and not really appropriate for what I wanted there. What I'd rather have is, why don't I go ahead and change this pixels to percent. Now when I run my code, something really interesting happens. It becomes 50% of the total width of the page. And as I scale my page, you can see that my image is scaling up to adjust. So it's always staying at 50%. Now I like that. I'm going to keep it. I think it's a really nice thing to do, especially considering all different types of users who are using different devices and maybe looking at this through a phone or what have you. So 50% really works for me. Now let's take a look back at our CSS code for a minute. What we've done is we've defined the basic structure for how all CSS rules will look. It starts with a selector. Then we have an opening and closing curly bracket. Inside of those brackets, we have this indented space that helps to show that these properties belong inside the image selector. And then we use a property like width and a value like 50%. This pattern is going to continue on as we style the other elements on this web page. So let's go ahead and try this. I'm going to skip down here to line 5, and I'm going to add another selector, this time for the H1. Now my goal here is going to be to change the color of the H1 tag. Once again, I'll follow the curly bracket suggestion here, and it'll format my code nicely for me. And then inside, instead of width, if I want to change the color, I'm going to add, you guessed it, color. I'll go ahead and I'll click on this autocomplete, which adds the colon right in there for me. This is really helpful for users on tablets where it's sometimes difficult to get into the different menus and select those different symbols. And look what happens here. The editor is actually smart enough to understand that I want to pick a color. And so it's suggesting all sorts of colors from the list of web-safe colors. I'm going to go ahead and go with a pre-selected color that I chose before called steel blue. I like it because it sort of matches the image tones. So when I hit run code, you'll see that here we go, my heading has changed. And it looks pretty good with that image, I think. Now, the next thing I want to show you is that in some cases, it can be effective to actually apply your CSS styles to a lot of elements at once. In CSS, the idea of specificity is very important. And what I mean by that is oftentimes CSS starts with big, broad strokes, big, broad rules that generally style the page a certain way. And then they get more specific as you go. So in this case, let's make a big, broad rule. Let's actually go in and let's find an element in HTML that encompasses our entire page. So you notice I switched tabs back to HTML, the red tab, and I scroll down and look at this. Do you remember this tag from the last video? This is the body tag on line 8. You'll notice that it starts here in the locked region and it doesn't end until all the way down here on line 30 where it closes. That's great for us because it means that if I style the body tag in CSS, it will affect all of the great stuff inside of it. So let's give this a whirl. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to type the word body. I'll add the curly brackets afterwards. And then in between, I'm going to use the property background dash color. In CSS, you're always going to use these dashes or hyphens to connect multi-word properties. And the more and more we learn, the more you're going to see those. So I'll add my colon after, just like before. And look at that, the color picker comes up once again. I'm going to go with the color wheat that's predefined here with a semicolon at the end. Go ahead and run code. Now look at that, rather than change the background color of just paragraphs or just H2s, for example, because we're using the body, we get this nice background for the entire page. So that's perfect. Now, one thing that's really cool that we haven't actually shown yet is that you can add multiple properties to one CSS rule. So this is what I mean by that. If I go back over here to line 10 and hit the Enter key again, notice I'm still inside of these curly brackets. I'm just underneath the background color line. And down here on line 11, let me go ahead and add a font dash family. There's that hyphen I was talking about again, that dash. Add the semicolon in here. And look at this. It gives me a couple different choices. I can change everything to be cursive. And when I hit run code, you'll see that it changes into this kind of fancy display font. I can go in here and change cursive to be fantasy. A lot of people may recognize this font, whether you love it or hate it. And then we're going to go in and let's see what else we got. How about monospace? This would be good for like something in architecture or maybe science or computer science, something where we want it to be more straightforward, very readable. And then I'm going to choose for this particular project sans serif. Sans serif is a very popular way to display content on the internet because it's very mobile friendly. It's very easy to read. So here we go. I've got my two different properties here. They look pretty good. I've got my background color using the body style. I've got my H1 styled and my image. So the last thing I'm going to do is I really want to talk about layout briefly. Now there's a lot of ways to lay out your page in CSS and new ones being developed all the time. Really flexible ways of delivering your content on different size screens and in different formats, and it just gets easier and more advanced every day. But the one I'm going to show you is the classic. It's called the box model. Now, to understand the box model, you've got to understand that we have three distinct CSS properties that can help us to push elements around on the page. Now, let me show you what I mean. I'm going to hit the Enter key a few times to make some space for myself. And down here outside of the body selector, I'm going to create a new selector for the P tag. Now, if you remember from the last video, the P tag is the paragraph tag. I'll go ahead and click on here. And what I'd like to do to the paragraph tag is I'd like to add the first of the three properties that make up the box model. The first one is the border. Now, border is a cool property. As you can see from BSD Online, there's all sorts of different variations on border. But I'm actually just going to go with the classic border, which takes 3 values. So check this out. 2 pixels, that's telling it how wide I would like the border to be. Solid, that's telling it what style I'd like the border to have. And then I'll say green. That's, of course, telling the computer what color it should be. So now when I run my code, it takes all 3 of those information and it puts it into these green 2-pixel wide solid borders around my paragraphs. Pretty cool. But one thing that's kind of bugging me is that the text goes right up to the edge of the border on the inside. Do you see that on the left-hand side here and on the top and bottom? What I'd like to do there is I'd like to actually add in some padding. Now, padding is the second property that makes up the box model. If I were to say padding 10 pixels and then the semicolon at the end, that will add 10 pixels of space in between the border and the content inside. Let's go ahead and hit run code again, and you can see how that works. Much better. Now we've got some breathing room in between our borders and the content. That looks great. Now the third thing that we're going to do is called margin. Now for this particular example, what I'm going to say is I'm actually going to do margin dash bottom. You can control with certain properties where you would like the style to occur by doing hyphen, top, right, bottom, or left. You can do that with actually border, padding, and margin. It works for all of them. In this particular case, I'd like to add a bunch of space at the end of each paragraph, almost to make them look more like blog articles where you're supposed to read them independently. So what I've done is I've added 100 pixels of space on the outside of the border below each paragraph. And when I hit run code, sure enough, that's what I get. There we go. So I've now got my spacing under here and under here. So this is really coming together. It's a whole bunch of CSS styles that work together. They stack on each other. It's really, really fun. This is where kids get to be really creative with the fonts and how they express themselves. And we can really take our website and make it something unique and special and customized to us. I can't wait to see what you make with CSS. And thanks for watching.